At dawn, I discovered an amazing secret. My daughter-in-law in my robe while my husband revealed. The sun peeked through the frayed curtains in the kitchen, casting a soft glow that contrasted sharply with the chilling weight in the air. Margaret, bleary-eyed and steeped in the fatigue of juggling 2 jobs and a bustling household, padded softly across the cool tile floor. There, in front of her, sat Emily, her daughter-in-law, wrapped in that familiar fluffy robe, the cherry blossoms a stark reminder of better times. Tears flowed freely down Emily's cheeks, each drop shimmering with despair. With her heart pounding, Margaret's gaze flicked to Dave, her husband, who sat beside Emily. Engrossed in conversation, he was the picture of earnestness, his brow furrowed and voice low. The sight of him gazing at Emily with concern felt like a knife twisting in Margaret's gut. What was happening? At that moment, time seemed to freeze, the world outside blurred, muffled by the crumbling facade of their family. "I'm drowning, Dave," Emily's voice cracked, mirroring the fracture in Margaret's heart. "The student loans, the pressure, I can't do this alone." Margaret felt her stomach churn as the words sunk in. Emily, dressed in privilege and armed with a diploma from a renowned college, was struggling. Heavy guilt loomed in the air, suffocating the warmth of love that usually thrived in their home. Dave's reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder made Margaret's blood boil. Who was he to offer her support when his own wife was barely keeping it together? Didn't he see the sacrifices she made day in and day out for their family? Each late-night shift, every extra penny saved, what did it all amount to in the face of this new reality? As the conversation escalated, so did Margaret's emotions. "Is this really what you want?" She wanted to scream, but the words lodged in her throat. Dave caught her eye, the flicker of conflict coursing through him, yet he continued, unwilling to acknowledge the fraying threads of their lives. Margaret's heart ached not just for her own struggles, but for Emily, who stood there with her perfectly polished life revealing a cascade of cracks. Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. As the words hung in the air, Margaret searched for clarity. This wasn't just about Emily or Dave. It was about family, survival, and the illusion of togetherness. She felt like a juggler in a circus act, with relationships dangling precariously, and every movement could send everything crashing down. With time slipping away, Margaret took a breath, contemplating the fracture threatening her family. Did Emily's pain eclipse her own? Could she embrace the vulnerability and be the rock for both? The kitchen felt colder as the sun continued to rise, each ray revealing a path fraught with uncertainty. Just as she opened her mouth to voice her fears, the shrill sound of the phone cut through the tension like a knife, leaving everyone frozen, hearts racing, craving the resolution that felt just out of reach. The shrill ring of the phone echoed off the walls, slicing through the thick air that hung in the kitchen like a heavy blanket. Margaret could feel the pulse in her temples quicken. With every second that passed, the intensity of the moment seemed to swell, drawing her deeper into her thoughts and fears. "Don't you dare answer that," she thought fiercely, yearning for a moment to speak, to share the suffocating weight of her own worries. But this was Dave in action now, and he reached for the phone without hesitation. "Hello?" he said, his voice dampened yet steady. Margaret watched him intently as he stood to the side, his eyes darting between Emily and the window, as if somehow searching for an escape from the tension that enveloped them. Emily shifted in her seat, her shoulders drooping under the burden she had carried alone for too long. There was a vulnerability in her expression that tugged painfully at Margaret's heart. Could she manage her own fears, or would they eclipse the support her daughter-in-law needed? "Margaret?" Dave's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "It's your sister. She's in the hospital." The world around Margaret went still, the air sucked out as if the walls were closing in. Her heart raced violently, as she processed the words. What?
How?
Panic tightened around her throat, and her anxiety ignited a sense of urgency. Fell down the stairs, Dave explained, and for a moment, everything else faded into the back of her mind. The burdens of student loans, expectations, and familial responsibilities slipped from her grasp as concern for her sister shattered the fragile facade. Is she okay? Margaret's voice shook, a mixture of fear and disbelief. I don't know. They're running tests, Dave replied, rubbing the back of his neck. Margaret's instinct kicked in. We need to go, she declared, urgency propelling her forward. The inner turmoil about Emily dissolved under this new wave of crisis. I'll take you there now. Emily's expression shifted, eyes wide with concern. Margaret, I don't. Just stay here and calm down, Margaret cut in sharply. She felt a flicker of resentment as she grabbed her coat. This was not how her morning was supposed to unravel. But before she could exit, a sudden wave of guilt washed over her. Leaving Emily alone in such a vulnerable state felt wrong, yet she couldn't shake the mustard-yellow fear of losing another sister, her closest support in darker times. Just breathe, Margaret said to Emily, her voice softer, as she turned back. It was a reminder for both of them, a shared moment despite the turmoil. As she dashed out, Dave followed her, concern etched across his face. We'll figure it out, Margaret. We just need to figure what out? She snapped, frustration bubbling up again. What about Emily? Are you really worried about her when your sister is in danger? That's not fair. Dave shot back, his voice rising. I'm trying to manage everything. Margaret felt the weight of it all, the rawness of hurt hanging palpably in the air. Could their marriage bear another test? Could they bridge the widening gap threatening to swallow them whole? Just as they reached the door, Emily's tear-streaked face swam back into view, a fragile light amidst the storm. I'll be okay, just go, she whispered, and those simple words hung in the air like a haunting melody. As they stepped out into the bustling morning light, it dawned on Margaret that this path filled with uncertainty and fear was only beginning. How much could she endure? Could she show her family the way forward when her own heart felt so heavy? As the car sped down the road, those questions loomed over her, an unwelcome fog. What awaited her at the hospital? Would the walls of their family, already frayed, hold together long enough to withstand the storm? The sun barely peeked over the horizon, casting a muted light through the car's dusty windshield. Margaret gripped the steering wheel, knuckles whitening. The silence between her and Dave felt like a canyon, vast and indefinable. He stared out the window, lost in thought, as cars whizzed by them, unaware of the personal storm brewing in their small vehicle. Margaret's mind raced ahead, crisscrossing from one fear to another. Will she be okay? What if? Each question tangled with the next, turning her thoughts into a snarl. Yet, beneath it all, a flicker of doubt churned within her. The shared space between her and Dave had transformed into an unsettling void. How had they drifted so far apart, even now, in a moment of crisis? Dave broke the silence, his voice hesitant, almost fragile. What happens if it's bad news? She could feel her heart straining under his words. What do you mean? We just have to stay positive. But deep inside, a gnawing fear flickered. What if this was just one more disaster piling onto the precarious balance of their lives? Losing her sister would feel like losing a piece of herself. She stole a glance at Dave, but the distance in his eyes made her heart sink a little more. They arrived at the hospital, a stark building rising against the early morning sky. Margaret parked, her breath hitching as they both stepped out. The weight of the moment washed over her like a crash wave, the concrete steps to the entrance seeming to elongate with every step she took. Once inside, bright fluorescent lights illuminated sterile walls. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, cold and unyielding. A nurse with tired eyes approached them, clipboard in hand. "Are you here for Margaret Hall?" she asked, her tone professional yet warm. "Yes, that's my sister," Margaret answered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The nurse nodded. "Follow me." As they moved through the winding halls, Margaret's stomach twisted and turned, her heartbeat echoing in her ears like a war drum. They arrived at a small waiting room. Photographs of smiling children hung on the walls, blissfully unaware of the fear that lurked just outside the frame. Sitting down, Margaret folded her hands tightly in her lap, capturing a spark of calm in the rising storm. Dave leaned close, his presence both grounding and confounding. "Listen, about earlier I didn't mean to, not now," she whispered sharply, feelings bubbling like hot coals between them. "We can't fight here."
"Not now."
He sighed and reclined in his chair, staring at the ground. Moments passed, filled with tentative glances and unspoken words, then, unexpectedly, the door swung open. An unfamiliar doctor stepped in, his face bleak. "I'm sorry," he began, and Margaret felt her breath hitch. "There's been a complication. Margaret's going to need more tests." Panic clawed at her throat, making it hard to breathe. "What do you mean? Is she going to be okay?" "I wish I could give you a definitive answer, but we need to observe and monitor her carefully," the doctor said, his voice weighed down by the burden of uncertainty. The world around Margaret blurred, drowning out the doctor's voice. She felt a wave of despair crashing over her, and beside her, Dave shifted nervously, hands trembling. "Margaret," his voice broke through the heaviness. I can't talk right now," she snapped, her own frustration aimed at him. It felt so unfair that their marriage, already on thin ice, was now weighed down by this moment. They were adrift in a sea of worry with no land in sight. Tears pushed at the back of her eyes, but she blinked them away. There had to be a way through this, a way to salvage what was left of their family. As she sat there, a new thought flickered in her mind. If she couldn't even support her own daughter-in-law, or navigate the challenges of her marriage, what strength did she have left? The clock on the wall ticked on, time slipping through her fingers. Whatever the outcome for her sister, it would change everything. Just then, a muffled cry echoed from the hallway, raw and despairing, spiraling into the air like a frantic yell for help. Instinctively, Margaret's heart leapt, mind racing. What was happening? What more was she about to face? As the doctor opened the door to leave, Margaret's breath caught in her throat. "Wait," she called out, panic surging. "What is going on? Who was that?" The doctor turned back, his eyes wide with concern.
"I'm sorry, ma'am.
It appears there's been a critical situation in the emergency room. A woman just fell unconscious, and it's related to the ongoing patient load. We're doing our best." Margaret felt the room tilt, her body going numb for a fleeting moment. A surge of fear twisted inside her, merging chaos with panic. Her mind buzzed. "Not her, not now," she murmured under her breath. Dave shot up from his seat, his expression a mix of confusion and dread. "Is it connected to my sister?" he asked, his voice raised, as if he could will the answers into existence. The doctor hesitated, a flicker of empathy passing over his face. "I can't tell you that," he replied softly, "but we're focusing on her, and that's all I can assure you of right now." Margaret's breath quickened, each inhale sharper than the last. She felt betrayed, trapped between worry for her sister and the walls closing in on her fragile marriage. The what-ifs loomed larger than life, a dark shadow that threatened to consume them. The silence returned, punctuated only by the distant beeping of monitors and the hushed sighs of other waiting families. Margaret gripped the armrests, nails digging into the fabric, as if she could ground herself through sheer force of will. "Dave," she whispered, her voice softening despite the turmoil swirling within. "What if we don't get to say goodbye? What if she doesn't make it?" His eyes filled with unshed tears, yet he shook his head. "We can't think like that. We have to believe she will pull through." A lump formed in her throat.
"How?"
The question fell heavy between them. How could they believe in anything anymore, when every moment felt like another blow against them? Minutes dragged on like hours. The waiting room felt like an echo chamber, amplifying every anxious thought that crept into their minds. Margaret caught a glimpse of a mother cradling a small child, the little girl oblivious to the pain surrounding them. If only their situation could feel as uncomplicated, unable to fight back any longer. Margaret's tears broke free. They spilled over her cheeks, hot against the coolness of her skin. She wiped her face with trembling hands, furious at how powerless she felt. "Margaret, don't." Dave reached out, brushing his fingers along her elbow, trying to soothe her. But it felt patronizing. Instead of comfort, his touch ignited a fresh wave of frustration. "Your words don't carry weight right now," she snapped. "It's like you think everything is going to magically fix itself. It's not. Not unless we really do something. I get it, but I need you with me." He pulled back, hurt splashing through his eyes.
Do you even know how?
It's easy to sit back and hope. The door swung open again, a rush of light spilling from a hallway. Another nurse appeared, her expression wearied but hopeful. "Mr. and Mrs. Hall?" Margaret's stomach churned as each word felt like a knife, ready to cut through everything they had left. The nurse hesitated. "There has been an update about your sister. Is she okay?" Dave asked, tightening his hands into fists. "We need to talk to you," the nurse said gently. "It's about her condition." Margaret's pulse quickened, dread mingling with anticipation. Whatever news awaited them could change everything. "Actually, we need to see the doctor first," she said, rising abruptly to face the nurse. "We deserve answers." Fear wrapped around her heart like a vice. It felt like each step forward was dragging her deeper into an abyss. Yet there was no turning back now. Just outside her room, in those tense seconds that felt infinitely stretched, another scream echoed, raw and haunting. This time it was near them, shattering any remnant of comfort. "What's going on?" she whispered, every nerve in her body standing on edge. As they stood there, the weight of unknown consequences pressed down heavily. In that moment, Margaret felt the shattering sense of urgency swell. Something was changing. But what, exactly, remained hidden from their grasp, and as whispers rushed through the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover a secret far greater than they anticipated. The nurse glanced back toward the hallway, her brows knitted tightly together. "Please follow me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the air in the room was thick with fear. Both Margaret and Dave exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the storm brewing in front of them. The small room felt confined with too many emotions swirling in its walls. Margaret's heart thudded loudly in her chest, echoing against her ribs. She followed the nurse hesitantly, Dave close behind, his jaw set with determination that looked fragile from her perspective. As they entered, the doctor was already there. He stood by the bed where their sister lay, the steady beep of the heart monitor somehow both comforting and maddening. Margaret's mind rushed. Did that sound mean something good? Or was it a faint echo of what was to come? "Sit down," the doctor urged gently, gesturing towards the chairs that stood opposite the bed. Margaret's heart sank at the clinic-like atmosphere filling the space, warning of considerations she wasn't ready to tackle. "Your sister, she has experienced some serious complications," he began, his voice low yet steady. "We managed to stabilize her for now." Dave's breath caught in his throat, and Margaret turned to him. She could see the core of hope beginning to wane in his eyes. But she pushed, her voice just above a whisper. "She'll need surgery," the doctor continued, not meeting their gazes. "It's urgent, and there are risks involved. We need you to understand that." "Risks?" Margaret felt her heart begin to race, thoughts spiraling as fear gripped her tightly. "What do you mean?" "Her condition is precarious. We have to act fast, but there are no guarantees. The outcome can depend on many factors, including her response to the procedure." In that instant, Margaret understood the depths of uncertainty choking them both. Her gaze landed on the bed where her sister lay, pale and fragile, the machines around her keeping the flicker of life alive. A profound sadness swelled within her. "Will she make it?" David's voice cracked uncharacteristically, revealing just how deeply this had cut him. The doctor hesitated, his eyes finally meeting theirs. "We hope so," but he paused, gathering his words. "It's best to prepare for any outcome." Again, silence filled the room. Heavy, daunting, laden with unspoken dread. Margaret felt her world collapse around her as they tried to process this reality. The minutes felt endless. "I can't imagine losing her," Margaret said, her voice barely a tremor. It was as if saying the words would make them true. "You won't lose her. We're doing everything we can," the doctor reassured, squeezing her shoulder lightly before shifting back toward the door. "I'll give you both a moment." As soon as the door closed behind him, hope shattered into pieces. "What if she doesn't make it?" Margaret whispered, tears pooling in her eyes as the weight of their situation crashed into her once more. "I refuse to believe that." Dave clenched his fists on the chair, determination gleaming through anguish. "We can't fall apart now. Not when she needs us." "But what if we lose her?" Margaret's voice was thick with despair. "What if she never wakes up again? Then we'll fight for her. We'll fight until she's here, breathing." Laughing, his voice faltered, and he pressed his palms hard against his eyes, frustration and sadness colliding. "I need to believe we'll have that chance." The air between them thickened with unshed tears, each filled with fear, desperation, and a burning need to find strength in such a dark moment. They were fragments of hope, longing for something solid, something to hold on to. But even as they clung to their grit, a sudden commotion outside the room drew their attention. Shouts echoed, urgent and frantic. "What's going on?" Margaret stood up, heart racing anew. Before Dave could answer, the door swung open again, revealing a cadre of nurses and doctors rushing past, a cacophony of chaos that sent dread coursing through her veins. What is happening?" Margaret took a step back, uncertainty twisting like a knife in her stomach. "We need to hurry," one of the nurses called back. Everything around her faded, but the reality tightened its grip. Something had gone wrong, not just for her sister, but perhaps for everyone in this fragile moment that felt all too close to the edge.
Dave.
Margaret clasped his arm tightly, panic weaving into her words. "What is happening?" As their eyes met, an unspoken fear crashed over them. The night had become infinitely darker, and the truth they were grappling with was yet to be revealed. And just then, as the tumult rose to a fever pitch outside the room, a single, piercing scream cut through the chaos, chilling them to their core. What lay ahead felt more terrifying than they could have imagined. The scream echoed in the air, wrapping around Margaret and Dave like a heavy fog. It wasn't just any cry, it was filled with pure terror, a sound that promised bad news. Panic gripped Margaret's heart as she glanced toward the door, as if hoping to catch a glimpse of the chaos unfolding outside. "Maybe it's not about her," Dave whispered, though his own voice trembled, betraying his dismissal of hope as much as it clung to him. It could be something else. But had they both heard that mixture of desperation and despair? Margaret felt a chill wrap around her spine, and she took a step closer to the bed, desperate to ground herself in the reality of her sister, lying there. The heart monitor beeped steadily, a strange juxtaposition to the horror unfolding just outside their room. "Stay close to me," she whispered, reaching out to hold onto the warmth of Dave's arm. "Of course, I won't leave you," he replied, his eyes darting between the door and the bed. Moments felt like hours. Every second stretched unbearably as they waited, holding their breaths, hearts pounding in sync. Once again, the door burst open, and this time, a frantic young doctor rushed in, his brows furrowed with urgency. "Where's the emergency kit?" he shouted, eyes wild as he searched the room. "What happened?" Margaret's voice trembled, her body instinctively tensing with fear. "There's been a complication in the surgical prep area," he blurted out, barely giving them a chance to process the words. He brushed past them, quickly grabbing supplies from the counter. "Complication?" Dave echoed incredulously, a mixture of disbelief and dread. "What about our sister?" The young doctor turned, eyes wide. "We're doing everything we can, but her situation is urgent. Just stay here." And with that, he rushed back into the fray, the door slamming shut behind him. A heavy silence settled once again, amplifying the weight of their despair. "Why does this keep getting worse?" Margaret whispered, her heart aching for the sister they were desperately trying to protect. "Because sometimes it gets darker before it gets light," Dave said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, and for a brief moment, she felt the flicker of hope he was trying so hard to nurture, but just as quickly, doubt gnawed at her insides. "What if we're losing her?" Margaret asked, the tears finally spilling down her cheeks. What if the doctor was right? What if there's never any waking up again? "Stop," Dave said firmly, turning her to face him.
Don't think like that.
His eyes searched hers, intense and filled with raw emotion. "She needs us to be strong. We have to believe she'll pull through." Believe, Margaret scoffed bitterly, even as she wanted to cheer up. In hope? In a chance? She looked around the room, the machinery ticking around them, the echoes of footsteps still an assault against her senses. "It feels like we're running out of time." A long, painful moment passed, filled only with the sounds of the heart monitor's rhythmic beeping. Dave tightened his grip on her shoulder, as though willing his strength into her. "What we can do is wait, it's all we can do right now." Margaret took a deep breath, trying to embrace the feeling of his solidarity. But before she could compose herself, the door burst open again. This time, it was the head doctor, panting heavily, his white coat stained with something she could only hope wasn't blood. "Where's the family of Emily Sanders?" he asked, locking eyes with them. The urgency in his voice sent a wave of coldness through Margaret as reality crashed back down on her. "Right here," she managed, her voice barely more than a whisper, as dread pooled thick and heavy in her stomach. "Come with me," he urged sharply, eyes frantic. "You need to understand what was happening." She felt the walls closing in, and that moment of dread shifted into sheer terror as she glanced at Dave, who looked just as bewildered. "Margaret," he started, but the fear was etched into his face. As they followed the doctor out of the room, the icy grip of dread tightened around Margaret's heart. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her, and with each hurried step, the questions flooded her mind. What awaited them in the chaos of the hallway? What would they be forced to confront next? As they entered the bustling corridor, the fevered energy of the hospital threatened to pull them under. And as she caught sight of the serious expressions around her, one overwhelming thought hit her. They were on the precipice of something far more life-altering than they could ever have expected. What awaited them at the end of this harrowing journey? The hallway was a whirlwind of noise. Nurses moved hurriedly, exchanging words that sounded like a foreign language. The beeping machines and murmured conversations melded into a cacophony that engulfed Margaret and Dave. The head doctor guided them with a firm hand, but Margaret barely registered the movement, her mind preoccupied with worry for her sister. "Emily," she murmured, half to herself. It was a name that now felt heavy on her tongue, like a weight she couldn't shake off. "Just a little further," the doctor said, glancing back at them with an intensity that made Margaret's heart race. She wanted to scream for him to stop, to buy them a moment of peace, as if pausing time could somehow rewrite the fate that loomed ominously before them. Dave stayed close to her, his presence a small anchor in the storm. But even that felt fragile, and she could see the beads of sweat on his forehead, his own fear threatening to spill over just like hers. They turned a corner, and the lights flickered above as if mirroring the turmoil inside her. The doctor stopped in front of a glass doorway, glancing back to ensure they were still with him. "You need to prepare yourselves," he said quietly, the gravity of his tone punctuating every word. "Prepare for what?" Margaret managed, her voice shaky. "What's happening to Emily?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes flickering to the floor. There was a quiet pause that felt like an eternity, and Margaret felt her breath catch in her throat. "What did the initial skin show?" Someone shouted from the other side of the glass. The doctor's expression shifted as he turned to Margaret and Dave. "She's stable for now, but complications have arisen that we didn't anticipate." "Complications?" Dave's voice cracked, the fear bearing down on them. "Like what?" The doctor took a deep breath, blowing it out slowly, as if gathering courage. "We found internal bleeding, and it's critical, but we're doing everything we can." His words faltered, leaving a gaping void filled with uncertainty. "Everything we can?" Margaret echoed, her heart racing faster. "What does that mean?" Before he could respond, The door swung open, and a flurry of doctors and nurses wearing surgical scrubs rushed past, urgency painted on their faces. Margaret's pulse quickened as they moved in and out, her heart keeping pace with their frenetic energy. "Mom?" She heard a voice behind her, and she turned around to see a young man, frantic and disheveled. "What's going on?" It was her mother's youngest son, Michael. The sight of him made her want to collapse, to cry. "Michael," she managed, but her voice was lost amid the chaos. "Is it Emily?" he gasped, eyes wide. Margaret could see the spark of hope in his gaze, and that made her throat tighten even more. "She's in trouble. We're here to find out what's happening," she replied, her voice breaking. "Someone say something," he yelled, his panic seeping into the air around them. The rawness of his plea echoed through the corridor, and Margaret felt the weight of it. Suddenly, everyone's eyes were on them, waiting, hoping to end that moment of despair. Time felt as though it was slipping through her fingers. She closed her eyes, squeezing them tight, trying to block the tide of emotions. "What if?" Dave began hesitantly, but he stopped as a nurse rushed past them again, a look of concern etched on her face, and Margaret's mind began to race. She couldn't let herself believe the worst.
Not now.
"You have to hold on, Margaret whispered, her heart aching for the sister she could barely see. "You have to fight." Her desperate thoughts were interrupted as the doctor's serious voice broke through the tumult. "You need to understand that we are preparing for an emergency procedure. It is crucial. We need you to be ready for anything." Margaret's stomach dropped. What did that mean? "Anything," she echoed, grasping for understanding even as her heart plummeted deeper into trepidation. Questions flooded in. Would Emily make it through? Would they be facing a future without her? And as the looming uncertainty settled heavily above them, one thought clawed at the edges of her mind. There was still so much they didn't know. What could possibly happen next? Margaret's heart raced as the doctor's words hung heavily in the air. Ready for anything. What did that even mean? She glanced at Michael, whose eyes were wild with fear, mirroring her own. She could see him clenching his fists at his sides, battling against the helplessness they were all feeling. "Mom, what is going to happen to Emily?" Michael's voice was a thin thread of desperation, pulling at Margaret's resolve. "I don't know, honey," she admitted, squeezing her eyes shut once more, willingness fighting against growing despair. "We just have to trust the doctors." Dave stepped closer, silently offering his hand. His touch was solid, something real in this surreal nightmare. She held on tightly, the warmth grounding her as panic threatened to swallow her whole. Through the glass, the silhouettes of medical staff moved with purpose. Each figure that flitted by felt like a haunting reminder of the uncertainty they faced. One of the doctors turned momentarily, and for a split second, Margaret caught his gaze. There was a kindness there, but also an urgency that sent shivers down her spine. "What if we lose her?" Michael's words cut through her thoughts, and in that moment, she felt a collective chill sweep through them. She noticed other families, waiting, just like them, expressions etched with worry. Each heartbeat in that corridor pulsed with fear, a shared strength in their vulnerability. The hallway dimmed as the overhead lights flickered again, casting long shadows. It was so quiet, so unlike before. Faint murmurs echoed from the rooms, punctuated by the occasional beeping of the machinery. Margaret Dave's voice gently interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "We need to stay positive for Emily." "Positive?" She shot back, her voice sharper than she intended. "How can we be positive when they don't even know if she'll be all right?" The frustration poured out of her, fueled by her fear. Dave's eyes softened, recognizing the storm brewing inside her. "We can't give up hope. That's what she needs right now," he replied firmly. A wave of guilt washed over her. He was right. Deep down, she knew Emily would want them to fight, to believe. "I know, I'm sorry," she murmured, though it felt inadequate. From the corner of her eye, she saw the doctor returning. He approached with a steady stride that did little to calm her racing pulse.
"We have to take her now," he said. "Please step back." "Wait,"
Margaret urged, desperation clawing at her throat. Can't we see her? Just for a moment? Right now, it's critical that we focus on stabilizing her, he said, offering no room for debate. Margaret could feel her resolve shattering as the doctor turned to the glass door, about to disappear into the chaos.
No.
She yelled. You have to promise us you'll do everything. He paused and looked back at her, his eyes filled with a sincerity that made her heart ache. I promise we'll do everything we can. And with that, he disappeared, leaving an echo of his promise behind. They stood there, silence settling like an unwelcome guest. Margaret felt lost again, facing the crushing weight of fear, uncertainty, and the flicker of hope that still managed to survive. I can't wait here, she whispered, trembling. Margaret Dave's hand tightened around hers. Whatever happens, we face it together. Remember that. The words sank in, a lifeline in this storm. Suddenly, she heard a commotion behind the glass door. She turned, dread pooling in her stomach. And in that moment, a scream echoed from within, a sound that seemed to encapsulate all their fears, intertwining with the pulse of the hallway. What's going on? Michael gasped, horror flickering across his face. Margaret's heart dropped. The sound reached out to her, digging into her soul, igniting a fear she never knew existed. What is happening to my sister? She whispered, the question hanging in the air, heavy and real. As the chaos swelled behind them, she felt a desperate urge to run, to find Emily, to grasp her hands and fight together. But as she stood rooted in sorrow and uncertainty, one thought screamed louder than the
rest.
What if Emily was fighting something much darker than any of them could imagine? Margaret felt the world tilt slightly beneath her. The scream had jolted her to the core, and now the weight of realization settled heavily on her chest. She could almost hear the echo of Emily's laughter from their backyard, the way it rang out like music through the warm summer air. How could that joyful girl, full of life and promise, be in such peril now? Don't just stand there, she cried, her voice rising over the muted sounds of the hospital. She felt a primal instinct surge within her, a mix of fear and anger that demanded action. She could see Michael's face, pale and stricken, and she knew she had to shield him from falling into despair. Let us find out what is happening, she said, yanking her hand from Dave's grasp. He looked startled, but she pushed forward, urgency coursing through her veins. As they pressed against the glass door, Michael's startled eyes mirrored her determination. Mom, are you sure? He asked, his voice trembling. Yes, she affirmed, a fierce resolve taking root in her heart. We need to be there for her. They ducked through the door before anyone could object, stepping into a dimly lit corridor buzzing with activity. The beeping machines and hurried footsteps became a chaotic symphony around them. Nurses rushed past, some with expressions of focused efficiency, while others wore worry like a shroud. Margaret could feel the tears threatening to spill as they navigated the maze of the hospital. She gritted her teeth against the surge of panic, willing herself to remain steady. There was something undeniably wrong, and she needed to confront the fear that clawed at her. Where do we go? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Follow me, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. They turned a corner, and a sudden hush settled as they approached the critical care section. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, a sharp reminder of the reality they faced. A nurse stepped forward, concern etched across her face. I'm sorry, but you can't. Margaret cut her off, desperation spilling from her lips.
Please. We need to see Emily.
She's our daughter. Our sister. The nurse hesitated, glancing back toward the chaos in the room beyond. It's complicated right now. We're trying to stabilize her. Please, complicated? Margaret echoed, emotions boiling over. She's in there fighting. Don't you understand? We can't just stand here. Just then, the door to Emily's room swung open, and the tension hung thick in the air. A doctor emerged, his brow furrowed, a clipboard in hand. He looked directly at them, and Margaret felt the ground shift beneath her. Are you family? He asked, and she almost said yes before realizing he was looking at both her and Michael, who stood clutching Margaret's arm like a lifeline. Yes, she replied, steeling herself for whatever words were to come next. The doctor took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over both of them. Emily is in critical condition. We're doing everything we can to help her. Can we see her? Michael pleaded, his voice shaky like a fragile thread. The doctor paused, a flicker of empathy crossing his face. I can allow one of you to enter for a moment. The rest will need to wait. Margaret's heart raced. She could already imagine Emily in that stark hospital bed, surrounded by machines, fighting for every breath. But there was no time for argument. Michael, you go. I'll wait, she insisted, even as the words broke her heart. No, Mom. I want you there, he insisted, tears pooling in his eyes, breaking through the carefully erected walls of bravado. The decision hung heavy in the air, amplifying their fear. The doctor was losing patience. I can't wait much longer. It's a matter of urgency. Balling her fists, Margaret realized the truth. They needed each other, but in this moment, they also needed to be strong enough to fight for Emily. We'll be brave for Emily, she said, choking back a sob. Finally, Michael's face hardened, the innocence of childhood slipping away in that moment of urgency. You go. I'll wait outside. Margaret nodded, knowing they'd hold on to each other through this storm, no matter what. She stepped forward, wishing with every fiber of her being that she could take away Emily's pain. But as she moved toward the door, a new question filled her mind. Would they even recognize their sister once they crossed that threshold? And could she bear the answer? As Margaret stepped into Emily's room, the sterile smell of antiseptic filled her senses, a sharp contrast to the once vibrant spark of her daughter-in-law's spirit. Emily lay on the bed, eyes closed and surrounded by beeping machines and the soft hum of medical equipment. The pulse on the monitor felt like a ticking clock, each second echoing the fragility of life. Margaret felt her chest tighten as uncertainty washed over her. Emily, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. She stepped closer, heart racing, eyes drinking in the small details, the way her daughter-in-law's hair fanned across the pillow. How peaceful she looked despite the chaos surrounding her. Margaret reached out, brushing a trembling hand against Emily's cool skin. Suddenly, a whirlwind of emotions crashed down, and she recalled the laughter that used to fill their family gatherings, the joy that Emily had brought into their lives. You have to fight, sweetheart, Margaret urged, tears pooling in her eyes. We need you here.
Please.
Outside, Margaret could hear Michael's quiet sobs, and that sound alone ignited a fire inside her. She wanted to comfort him, assure him that everything would be okay. But right now she needed to be here, for Emily, for the family. Just then, the door swung open, and the doctor entered, a serious expression etched on his face. We've stabilized her, but she is still in critical condition, he said, urgency lacing his tone. We need to discuss the procedure we talked about. Margaret nodded, listening intently as he laid out the details, risks, and complications. Each word felt heavy, pressing down like the weight of the world. She was spiraling into a place of deep concern, but she forced herself to think. What can I do? She found her voice more resolute now. What can we do to help her? The doctor looked at her with kindness. Your presence here is significant. Remind her of the love that surrounds her.
Talk to her.
It can make a difference. Margaret took a deep breath, fortifying her heart. Okay, I will. Then, pushing her fears aside, she shared stories of their family, of summer picnics, of the little moments that made their lives rich. With each memory shared, she felt a connection surge between them, weaving a thread of hope through the uncertainty, like the fragile blossoms of spring daring to emerge after a long winter. Meanwhile, outside, Dave and Michael paced like coiled springs, hearts racing under the weight of fear. What's taking so long? Michael asked, a tremor in his voice. Dave put a firm hand on his shoulder, grounding him for a moment. She's fighting. Your mom is with her. We have to believe. But the words felt like hollow echoes amid their worry. Back in the room, Margaret sensed a flicker beneath her fingertips, a tiny but undeniable response from Emily. She focused, bringing warmth and love to the surface. Can you feel me, Em? We're all here. We're going to get through this.
Just hold on.
In that pivotal moment, hope flickered to life in her chest. She held Emily's hand tighter. Time slowed as she imagined their future celebrations, laughter, family reunions filled with love. She could almost hear the laughter ringing as the sunlight danced through their idyllic backyards. With new determination igniting within her, Margaret leaned in closer, whispering promises of brighter days and better tomorrows. Moments later, the door swung open again, and the doctor stepped back in, the look on his face softer now.
It's time.
We're ready for the procedure. She'll be taken care of. Margaret's heart swelled with gratitude. She nodded, feeling the power of collective strength surge through her family. As they prepared to leave the room, she cast one last look at Emily. We'll be right here, waiting, she promised. Outside, she found Michael and Dave, their worry momentarily forgotten as they came together, united in hope. They stood as a team, ready to face whatever lay ahead. And as they awaited news, the bond they shared felt unshakable, a light pushing back against the lingering shadows of fear. Hours passed, and finally, the doctor returned, the tension in the air palpable. The surgery was successful. Emily is stable and recovering. Joy erupted like fireworks in Margaret's heart. Tears of relief streamed down her cheeks, and Michael jumped into her arms, wrapping her tightly. She's going to be okay, he whispered, disbelief and wonder mingling together. Dave pulled them both in, his presence wrapping around them like a warm blanket. She fought for us, he said, voice thick with emotion. And in that moment, standing together, they felt the magnitude of what they had endured, alive with hope for the future. As they turned towards the room where Emily rested, Margaret knew. They would rebuild, stronger and united. Emily would heal, and through their trials, the heart of their family would beat anew. Let us go see her, Margaret said, the warmth of determination filling her spirit. Together, they stepped into the light, ready to embrace the journey ahead, knowing that life, with all its ups and downs, could truly shine once more. Now, this is your moment. You need to subscribe immediately to the channel for more stories like this. Hit that like button now to boost the algorithm and share the journey with others. Don't wait not even one more second. Leave your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. And if you care about your friends, share this video with at least 5 people who need to feel this incredible transformation. Together, let's spread hope and love.